Blog Talk Radio.
You're listening to Critical Mass Radio. Now, it's our turn.
Okay, tonight I'm sharing some of the infinite wisdom that comes from the indigenous people on this earth. Also got some information about how what you have been told about oil, its apparent scarcity in these times, and it being a fossil fuel might not be quite as it appears. I've got this week's update from the ITCCS, some of the latest news about the planned barbaric badger culls in the UK, and another special guest spot from Dan Ognoscu, the Green Man. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Cry Freedom Show. I hope you are all well, and I do send out my love to you all tonight. And I would just like to ask everyone to please send some positive energy to our manager here at the station, Paul, because he's suffering from a bad migraine today. And once again, it seems to have coincided with the time of the full moon. And there was one hell of a bright one last night. So if anyone listening out there has any knowledge of these lunar effects on us, then please do get in touch and tell us all about it. Hope you feel better soon, hon, anyway. Well, I've got a lot to fit in tonight, so I'm basically going to go straight into it with the next audio.
CMR Critical Mass Radio in association with We Are Change Manchester and Freedom Northwest. Please note the views and opinions expressed by the hosts on this show are not necessarily the views held by the station. CMR is for people who want answers, because now it's our turn.
Well, I'm guessing a lot of listeners may have already heard the audio I just played of the girl addressing the United Nations in Brazil, but it's such a hard-hitting one, I feel that I really wanted to play it. I'm not quite sure when she did this. It was some years ago, judging by the video, but I think what she says pretty much captures it all and gives the picture only too well of how far mankind has strayed from the right path. In fact, if we look at the so-called progression of our race, I think it's pretty obvious that we started losing the way a very, very long time ago. And it's been like a natural, although I feel that natural is not the right word to use, natural progression for such a long time in the wrong direction. And the crazy thing is that it isn't even that hard to see it when you look. It's pretty much blazingly in your face, actually. But the trouble, of course, is that so many people on the planet are just so very busy living their own, to a large extent, trapped existences, and the critical issues are, for the most part, ignored and or just acknowledged and then pushed aside. The even crazier thing is that a lot of the very much man-made problems in our world could actually be rectified and are not impossible to fix, and that is a fact. The snag, of course, is that the greedy people who control all the money and the resources aren't interested in any way, shape or form in doing this, because they can't see beyond their egos and their bank balances, unfortunately. So that, I'm afraid, leaves it in our hands, and the way I see it, the only way we are going to be able to start putting things right is by taking back the power, taking back the money and the resources, and starting the journey back on the path that will set things right. And that is the reason that CMR exists, because we are trying to give people the knowledge to help steer us back onto that right path. So, what is critical mass? Well, in the world of nuclear energy, it means the minimum mass of fissionable material, or fissionable, I can't say that word, that can sustain a chain reaction. And in the outside world, it's the minimum amount of whatever, so in this case people, required to start or maintain a venture. So in simplicity, critical mass means that if enough human beings have a personal shift in consciousness, this will enable the shift in consciousness of the masses. It begins with one and spreads to many. Our own consciousness is self-defined and quite literally self-imposed, and each and every time we create a label or a collection of labels, the danger is that we create a separation of our own consciousness, and that of the mass consciousness too. And this separation can cause fear, and fear simply causes a bigger chasm to cross, and this is the current paradigm that we live in. Also, the principle of critical mass can be applied to spiritual aspects, and I feel until the group consciousness gains enough magnitude to shift the mass consciousness, nothing changes. And I think as a human society, we do remain in the fear paradigm of change. So we come to the 100th monkey story about social change that, again, many of you will have heard, and it's based on a Japanese species of monkey living on the island of Koshima. And what apparently happened there in 1952 was that scientists who were studying their behaviour were feeding them sweet potato that was dropped into the sand. And although the monkeys loved the potato, they did not like the dirt that stuck to it. And so the story goes that an 18-month-old female monkey found that she could solve the problem by washing the potatoes in a nearby stream. And then she taught this trick to her mother and also to her playmates, who in turn showed it to their mothers. And the story tells that in 1958, there were a certain number of the monkeys who were now washing their potatoes in the stream. And although the exact number isn't known, let's say it was 99 monkeys. So then on this particular morning, the 100th monkey learned this trick and started doing it himself. And it is said by that evening, almost every monkey in the tribe was then washing their potatoes in the water, and that the energy that was created by the 100th monkey learning the process somehow created an ideological breakthrough. And the most surprising thing, apparently, that was observed by these scientists was that the habit of the washing of the sweet potatoes then jumped over the sea to colonies of other monkeys on other islands. So, in essence, when a certain critical number achieves an awareness, this new awareness is then picked up by almost everyone. Now, that story comes from a book called The 100th Monkey by a guy called Ken Keyes, and to be honest, I have no idea whether it's based on fact or fiction, but I know that it is a tale that most certainly does instill a feeling of hope, and that's a feeling that is very much needed at the moment. And I'm assuming that most of the listeners to me now and to CMR in general will get just how important it is for us all to have that positive hope for the future, because this is what will unite us and lead us back onto that right path again.
Life on this world can be so hard. It all can seem so very marred. For those who see outside the box, beyond the chains, beyond the locks, can see that life could be so good without those who are after blood. For the things we need to give us joys do not come in the form of toys. Instead, they are the purest pleasures that make us happy way beyond measures. The rippling stream, the swaying trees, our feet on the earth with the birds and the bees, our hands in soil respecting land, on the beach sinking in sand, watching the robin on the spade, resting in a shaded glade. For all these things we're sent as free, for you to enjoy as well as me. We were not meant to have to pay, the only species that lives this way. We have been used and told it's right by those who try with all their might to make us slaves and keep us scared, treat us like just one big herd. Well, the time has come for this to change, for some of us now see good in range. A chance to free us from this jail, an opportunity to lift the veil. And all it takes is for humanity to see that together we are the only key. Together we can undo the chains and free ourselves from all these pains. Our strength is as one to end this con. And so I say, namaste to all, let's make this system end and fall, and make a world that's true and pure. Let's do it now. Let's find that door.
You mentioned in one of your last talks that petroleum wasn't what we thought it was, that it wasn't a fossil fuel, that it didn't come from fossil animals.
Yeah.
Is it just a mineral? Is it a mineral like any other mineral? Is that how it? What would you say? How did it? What's the origin of?
You see, when they first found petroleum because they were beginning to make motors and needed on axles or wheels on railroad trains and all that sort of thing. And remember, trains started in the beginning of the 19th century. Then oil went from just a lubricant to a fuel, and it made it valuable. And Rockefeller happened to be the smartest man in the business at the time, but he made most of his money, or much of it, off the transport of the petroleum as well as selling it. But one thing they realized was, because oil is putting a price on oil is like putting a price on a pail of water. You know, there's no initial cost. It's in the ground, and in those days they were, some of it almost what you'd call surface mining the oil. They didn't go down deep. So in order to get the price up, they hit on the idea that they would have to make it appear to be scarce. That after we take the next few barrels out, we're probably going to have to close as well. You know, that kind of thing. Well, a very fortuitous event. In 1892, there was a convention in Geneva of scientists to determine what organic substances are. Well, the definition of organic is a substance with hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And so it's usually a living substance, a tree. You analyze a dead tree, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, and grass and so on, living things. Animals, we are hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So at this Geneva Convention, Rockefeller took advantage of sending some scientists over who said, oil, petroleum, is hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Therefore, it must be derived from the spoiling, the rotting of formerly living matter. And playing the game properly, when this scientific convention was over, they defined oil as the residue from formerly living matter. Well, that makes it a fossil fuel. I don't know why they decided to use the word fossil, but it says formerly living matter is fossil. Well, of course, today, and another thing we should know is that there has never been a fossil, a real fossil, found below 16,000 feet. And you can't argue at 16,000 there's a level line, because someplace the ground sinks and so on. But 16 is what the scientists say, 16,000. We mine oil, or we drill for oil, at 30,000, 33,000, 28,000 every day of the week. So right there we rule it out that it isn't fossil fuel. It's called fossil fuel for the minds of the public to feel that it is an asset that is running out, being depleted. We talk about depletion allowance, which is a lot of, and actually if you know the world's oil supply, you know that it is not going to run out for an awfully long time. It is the second most prevalent liquid on Earth. And we haven't begun to... Well, with all that background, you see, the people in charge of the petroleum business, for perfectly reasonable business things, like any other man in the business, wants to keep his price as high as he can get away with. And the way to do is just say, well, there's no more. The last barrel is going to cost $1,000, and then it's all done. And they preach that stuff. What bothers me is that in geology books, it's in there. The geologists say it's a fossil fuel. They've been bought. I went to a 4-year federal staff energy seminar run by the government of the United States during the so-called energy crisis. I was the participant that represented the railroad industry. The airline industry was there. Every AA, administrative assistant of senators and congressmen, was there. The CIA was there. The Defense Department was there. The State Department was there. Sometimes sitting right in front of me in the row would be Henry Kissinger with his friend, the head of Department of Defense. It's too bad I can't put the names with them. But anyway, people like that, top men in the government, sitting there listening to the Federal Staff Energy Seminar. Well, what this was doing is for 4 years they were teaching a propaganda line to the leading people in this country, and therefore to the leading people in the world, when you include the Schlesingers, Kissinger and Schlesinger, among others. And the object of it was, as Kissinger used in his own terms when it was time for him to speak, to create a world price for oil. In other words, not 30 cents a gallon here and 90 cents a gallon there, but let's get a world price. That's their goal, and they're trying to do that for wheat and everything else. We don't realize what the controls are, whether it's oil or some of these other things. Almost everything today is being categorized at the highest price they can possibly make it go. And so calling petroleum a fossil fuel is the basis for this system with respect to petroleum. And I don't know if the name Arthur Kantrowitz rings any bell. Arthur Kantrowitz is the head of the Kantrowitz Labs set up by the AFCO company near Boston, Scientific Laboratories. And a great man in the scientific world. And Kantrowitz and I were sitting at a table at this seminar once, and the table happened to be all young college grad, PhD geologists. And so just to get a conversation started, I turned to Kantrowitz and I said, Arthur, what do you think about this foolishness of these speakers talking about fossil fuel? And it was kind of put up. He started laughing. He said, you know, that gets me. He says, I don't have a geology degree, but he had 1,000 other degrees. And he said, I don't understand. See, you'd think that these heads, these other fellows at the table, we did it on purpose, start listening, you know. And he asked, he said, are you gentlemen? He says, you're here at the meeting. Are you gentlemen by any chance geologists? And one fellow, yes, I am. And the other, yeah. He said, well, why don't you tell me? He said, why is oil? You know, he went on like that. We brought the house down because nobody could argue with Kantrowitz. He like Einstein. People aren't going to. And he told him right there. He said, just drop it. But it's in all the books and in all the papers. But it started from that strange meeting in 1892, a scientific convention. I have a big, thick scientific encyclopedia put out by the Divan Ostrin Company that's about 15 years old now, but it has the whole story of the conference. It doesn't have the Rockefeller part, but it has the whole story of how they straightened out organic chemicals and how it was all figured, and they've got petroleum right in there.
Amazing. So
these aren't accidental things, you see. There's a dollar sign behind almost everything.
Critical Mass Radio is a completely non-profit station where the hosts pay to broadcast their shows. The mission of the station is to get as much information as possible out to people about the world we live in, to unite like-minded people, and to try to come up with workable solutions. If you agree with the work that we are doing, then please feel free to help us continue by making a donation on the webpage. CMR is for people who want answers, because now it is our turn.
There's a dollar sign behind almost everything. Oh, how true. Well, that is information I have heard before, but some of you may not have. And the first thing I would say is that the more I personally hear about what may or may not be true in this world, the more I realize how much humanity has been lied to over the years by the people who rule over us. And I put people in inverted commas there. And I've gotten to the stage where I just feel that pretty much everything is a manipulation of the truth, either completely or in part. And this stems so very, very far back, and I'm talking thousands of years here, not just hundreds. And I do believe sometimes that we will never, ever find out the real, total truth about our origins, where we came from and why we exist, and how much of our very existence has all been for the pure use of those with power to use us from the start. Now, I actually was brought up an atheist, and these days I do believe in a lot more than I ever used to, but more on the lines of energy and matter. And I do now think that there is something else out there, and I don't know what, but I do feel sure that there is an energy and a strong force that is trying to help humanity as much as it is able. And quite possibly this force is actually coming from ourselves, or those of us who are emitting the right energy. And I think there are many special people now on this planet that are all coming together for a purpose, and it is a positive purpose to help move things onto a new level. I will say that, yes, it is very easy to be negative about the future in these times we live in, and believe me, I've sure been through my negative periods big time. And although I still have times of finding it hard to move past all the evil that we see happening around us every day, I do feel a new hope. Well, for one reason, I feel that we have to have this hope within us, because if we don't, quite honestly, what is left? Because without hope, we might as well just all lay down and give up. So we have to have belief that things can get better. And I think we have to have the belief that it's very much in our hands to make things better, even though so often it feels like the negative power out there is so strong and so in control and so down on us that it's just completely overpowering. But if we give in to this, then we let ourselves down and the rest of humanity down so badly. And you know what, even if we have to go out dying to try to overturn this, then it's got to be worth it, right? At least to know that we tried. But my hope and feeling is still that it won't come down to this, and it's not going to be an easy job, and it's not going to be done in an instant. It's going to take time. But the more of us that get this and come together and spread whatever we can to try and make things better, then the quicker the process will be. So those of us who are lucky enough, and sometimes I know it doesn't feel lucky, but to be in a position to try to help this, have to work our butts off basically to push as much as we can out there for this purpose. Because what can be more important? Quite frankly, nothing. And I know for one thing, there is nothing else that I feel I want to be doing at this time, because as I've said before, once you know what is going on out there, it's impossible to concentrate on anything else because it just doesn't feel right. And I got to say now, when I mix with people that are still not aware of all this stuff, then I just can't spend hours and hours talking about what now feels like the mundane things that most people worry about, because this is just so big. And this is one of the reasons that I started doing this show, because although it does take up a lot of prep time each week and quite a lot of nerves drain, I just know inside that it's what I have to do. And even if it just reaches the odd person, then it serves a purpose. And at the end of days, I know deep inside that at least I tried, which is basically all any of us can do, right? So, gotta say, too, this week I actually started reading the Bible, which is a first, I can tell you, because I truly believe that the Bible, which has again been heavily manipulated and rewritten, etc., does contain essential information on our true origins and also the true so-called powers of humanity with regards to our inner strengths and our force and our essence. And I know there are people out there attempting to translate all this information. And even when you look at the beginning in Genesis, where we're told about Adam and Eve and the serpent and them forbiddingly eating from the so-called tree of knowledge, and at that point they become totally self-aware, and then they're cast out by, quote, God, unquote, I just think this speaks volumes. One of the people who's doing a lot of study on the Bible, just getting back to what I was talking about before that, and its true meaning, is Santos Bernanke, who was actually here on CMR a couple of months ago. And Santos has a lot of very interesting information that he gives out. And I just wanted to play this next audio, which talks about the significance of the number 11, which was talked about this week on the Peace of Mind show here on the station last Monday night by host Miguel Labera. Excuse me. Now, many people believe that this whole universe is run on numbers. And this is about the number 11 and the significance of 9/11.
Santos Bernanke has performed an extraordinary amount of research. He has drawn his own conclusions, just as you are encouraged to draw yours. Enjoy. If one visits the Shrine of Remembrance, the War Memorial in Melbourne, one might be reminded or learn that the World War I armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918. Making for a ceasefire on the Western Front at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month. Nearby, on the south bank of Melbourne, there is an artwork titled World Within, World Without by Helen Bodycomb. Now, this artwork reflects the constellations above Victoria at 11 a.m. on the 16th of November 2009, when Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made his national apology to the forgotten Australians. I was reminded of the number 11 once again. I asked Santos Bernanke about the number 11.
The number 11 keeps turning up because it stands for duality. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Or 1111. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4. 4 is the cube. The cube is the hex. Because when you flat pack a cube, you get a hex. And all of those numbers, 2, 4 and 6, they're feminine. They are even numbers, therefore they come from Eve. Eve is even, Adam is odd. So 2 was the number that Pythagoras spat on the ground, because he hated that number, you see, supposedly. Well, he didn't hate a number, he wouldn't be that stupid, but he knew how destructive the number 2 can be. And likewise the number 4 and the number 6. So you'll find that the elites will use that in their symbology. Look at 9/11, for instance. 9/11 is a classic case. When the Twin Towers on 9/11 came down, Saturn was in Gemini. And Gemini looks like, well, it's just two lines like that with a top and a bottom on it. So 2 pillars. And when they built the Twin Towers in 71 through 73, that was Saturn's other return when Saturn was in Gemini. And Saturn, as I said before, takes 30 years to go round in its orbit. So they built it in 71 and destroyed it in 2001. Now, and this was when Saturn was transiting Gemini, you see. So this 11 and the number 2 is very important to them. And it carries a lot of power with it, and especially in the Saturnian cult. I have touched on this in many of my radio shows and stuff, where I've spoken about all of the alignments that took place on 9/11. Quite incredible. In fact, I discussed there how Saturn was transiting the 9th house to the 8th house, in between the 2 plane crashes on 9/11. So on the first plane crash at 8:43 a.m., the Saturn was still in the 9th house, which is the house of travel. 8:46. The Sun was still in the 9th house, which is the house of travel. And by the time the second plane crashed, 902, 903. Guess what? Saturn was in the 8th house. That's the house of death. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You can't. And there's many more alignments. I can tell you what was happening with Mercury. Mercury was on the ascendant in the sign of Libra, which is about justice. Pluto was in the sign of Sagittarius, which also has to do with religion, and the religious aspect of 9/11 was certainly a part of it. Pluto was squaring with the Sun in Virgo, and of course, as I said, Saturn was in Gemini. So that's 3 mutable signs and a square between the mutable signs. Mutability means change and mutability. You see, change. So there you have the Sun, Pluto and Saturn in the 3 mutable signs squaring on that particular day, causing all these things to come about. And there's more, a lot more, but I won't go into it. But it goes on and on and on.
Thought I might just add some basic observations I've made myself regarding the word 11. If you break down the word 11, you can get EL plus even or Eve. So the EL may refer to a god such as the god El, which is perhaps a male god, and then you have Eve, the female portion. So you have El and Eve. Now this El also relates to electricity, so you may have electricity versus the feminine magnetism. So you have the perhaps polarity between the pillars, the 2 pillars that, well, that's what the number 11 looks like. Also you have the EL and you have even, and that reminds me of the word level, because the word level has the V in the middle with the EL on both sides, making the EL even, if you will, 11. Anyway, that's it. Bye for now.
Right, well, I think Santos Benaki is a really fascinating guy, and he's got some really interesting information to give out, and I think we're due to be having him back on the station here next month. Right, I've got to say, there have been some harrowing shows on this station this week, and we've had some horrific facts revealed about the abuse that is being done to our children in this country, and the absolute absurdity of what is happening with the social services, the SS as many now call them. And this is going on all around the world, and this stuff so goes all the way to the top of what is covertly controlling us. It's hard-hitting stuff that really needs to come out, because we all so really need to face up to this situation head-on, because this is what is happening to the innocent, vulnerable children on this planet. And if we can't all stand up to fight this, then there really is no hope. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on this tonight because it gets to me in a big way, but it's so important to try to drag people out of their own little insular world and make them aware of the facts. And I would urge listeners, if they have not already heard these shows, to check out the CMR podcasts on our website. And the website is www.criticalmassradio.co.uk. And you need to look at the Critical Mass show itself from this last Monday, and also the Earth Needs Rebels show that was broadcast last night. That was Wednesday night. And again, it is very hard-hitting and disturbing stuff that will shock some people, but this stuff needs to come out of the shadows, and it needs to come out as soon as possible. Right, moving on, I want to focus for a short while now on highlighting some of the wisdom that stems from what are a very much forgotten people on this planet, and that is the indigenous cultures, because so many people have become dominated by consumerism and just sadly no longer recognise the value of our natural world or the importance of the community. And the indigenous cultures have a lot to teach us about sharing and about sustainability, and very importantly about the spiritual relationship to Mother Earth. And actually in late October 2010, a group of 8 indigenous elders actually travelled to London, UK, to share the message that it is time to reconnect with Mother Earth in order to overcome a global environmental disaster. And they were motivated by a deep concern for humanity and the planet, and their visit formed part of a wider movement in which indigenous peoples are calling on the world community to urgently rethink modern notions of progress and development. The indigenous approach to living sustainably is not religious in any way, but one that conveys a spiritual touch which the elders believe is common to all people, and is the importance of nurturing relationships in communities through sharing. That is what is at the very heart of this approach. And alongside the understanding, of course, that our planet is a living entity that must be cared for and preserved for future generations, this ancient perspective clearly has immense implications for sustainable living during this period of global economic and environmental crises, and it does align closely to the views of a growing number of economists, policymakers, and just concerned people, basically. So one of the elders who visited London was a guy called Freddie Twill, and Freddie is an artist and a long-standing prominent member of the indigenous Mapuche community in Chile. He also founded and directs the Native Spirit Foundation, which is a non-profit charitable organisation which promotes the knowledge and preservation of indigenous cultures and supports education in indigenous communities. And I just wanted to read out a short extract from a speech that he made while he was over here in 2010, which basically goes as follows. Quote, "Every indigenous community, wherever they are located, has a cosmology which is related to Mother Earth and a relationship between individuals and people as well as an economy. But our economy was very much linked to the spiritual life. If we cut a tree, for example, we would always plant another one, and some indigenous cultures would hunt certain animals only for eating, not to accumulate wealth. They hunt to share. In indigenous communities, the ones who share the most are the most appreciated, the most important. In Western modern societies, the value of a person is based on how much they have. The indigenous people hold on to their memory of the past, which they identify with the present. But in the Western world, the way of life has become like a huge, big machine that has led millions and millions of people into a labyrinth from where there is no way to get out. The consequences of following this life system, this model of development, can be seen in the suffering of the indigenous people. There is the contamination of the waters which results from the exploitation of oil, the construction and building of dams to generate electricity, the cutting of the forests, the extinction and disappearance of different animals and species. In this sense, we indigenous people are confronting people so they can understand that these models of life that have been imposed through religion and economics cannot in any way help develop humanity. From our point of view, the heart of humanity has been lost, and the indigenous communities who have maintained the memory of a more spiritual and sustainable past are an alternative to this present way of life. And our people are united with all the different life alternatives around the world. It is not through religion, but through faith and life that all these different people who uphold an alternative way of living are united. The one who understands his culture can understand his past. In this sense, we know our past history, how we have been invaded, and how the different religions, economic and military systems have been imposed. The problems we face in the indigenous communities are a result of all this imposition. To give an example, for us it is very important to respect the elders, the children, the women and Mother Earth. But a foreign educational system unrelated to our traditional way of life has been imposed on us and has effectively destroyed the community in the name of so-called progress. Sometimes we found ourselves between two worlds, the imposed one and the ancestral one that we are now trying to revive. Another example of how our traditional way of life has been eroded is the use of pesticides on the land. These changes are not changes that have developed from the community, but they have been imposed on us from outside. And this exact same problem possibly exists everywhere in the world. But those who have the memory of their past and who have strong roots in their cultures, we know where we are going. The solutions are not only in future progress, but also in recovering our old culture. In our visits to different countries and cities in Europe, we have found many organizations and communities that promote exactly the same things that we are promoting, and that are searching for the same balance in life. So the indigenous elders that have come to Europe are working to relate these two different worlds together, to develop new possibilities of collaboration between the grassroots organizations of many countries. We do not come here with anger or to seek revenge, but to promote a different philosophy. We come with positive, constructive ideas to help.
You've got kind of a smorgasbord of musicians to pick from, so you get to come in and...
Child in a sweetie shop, isn't it? You wouldn't know who to pick.
I know. Well, everybody usually picks everybody, and then I have to go, well, no, we can't.
I did that too.
Yeah.
I'm going to play the latest update audio from Kevin Annett and the work of the ITCCS. An open letter to Canadians about your country's final solution and a final reckoning. A special communiqué by the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, Brussels, issued 23rd of September 2012. This week, 32 public summonses were issued to mostly Canadian citizens, including Prime Minister Harper and major church officials, calling them to account for colluding in or concealing unspeakable crimes against children. These crimes include beating children to death, kidnapping and starving others, torturing them in medical experiments or making them infertile, farming them out to wealthy child rapists, and gang raping and exploiting them as slave labour. These abominations occurred in Canada for over a century in detention camps misleadingly called Indian residential schools, run by Catholic and Protestant churches. Some of these crimes continue today in your country. Your tax money and church offerings have for many years helped to sustain these crimes and protect the guilty. Your police have buried the grisly evidence of these atrocities and continue to prosecute and silence those eyewitnesses who try to share the truth. And your politicians and courts continue to whitewash these crimes and exonerate the churches that killed off more than 50,000 children in what they still call Indian residential schools. The time of your complicity in these crimes against humanity is ending. For an international common law court of justice has convened and has charged dozens of Canadians with responsibility for genocide and criminal conspiracy. Their trial begins on October the 15th. You can be in the global online courtroom that will judge the evidence of Canada's genocide and come to a verdict. You can help Canada come clean about its deliberate plan of extermination against Indians by holding your nation and its churches to account and be indicted for their homegrown Holocaust. The Common Law Court will be posting online all of the evidence behind its charges, commencing October the 15th.
If a guilty verdict is reached, you are obligated under international law to stop funding and colluding with a government and churches found guilty of crimes like the following. The beating to death of Victoria Stewart, age 9, by United Church employee Ann Nitsky at the Edmonton Indian Residential School on April 9, 1958. The forced sterilisation of Sarah Modeste and hundreds of other young women by United Church doctor George Darby at the infamous R.W. Large Hospital. The use of Joan Morris and many other children as involuntary test subjects for drug testing, organ removal and pain endurance experiments at the Nanaimo Indian Hospital. The attempted murder of William Coombs, Ernie Tatouche and many other children by deliberately exposing them to tuberculosis and denying them treatment at Catholic, Anglican and United Church hospitals and schools, and the actual killing of more than half of the children in these facilities by such methods. The continued theft and trafficking of Aboriginal children through child aid government agencies. The historic reckoning for these crimes has finally arrived. Be part of this cleansing and not its impediment for all of the children. Educate yourselves by seeing some of the evidence at www.hiddennolonger.com. Stay tuned to www.itccs.org for the complete posting of all of the cases and evidence in the Common Law Court docket indicting Canada, the Vatican and other powers for crimes against humanity. Issued by the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, 23rd of September 2012. Brussels, London, New York. So that was the latest from Kevin, who sadly once again was unable to ring in this evening. He's currently out in Europe and extremely busy, as you can imagine, so he probably won't be able to come back on now until October when he returns home. But I'm sure he will give us all the news then. Right, I've got a new jingle coming up, and I just flipping love this one. It's I've got this amazing jingle put together, man called Mr. Jingle George himself, and he's right on after me tonight. And it's brilliant. I just send him the voiceover with a backing track, and he creates these fab jingles. So here we go, folks. Compose yourself. This is CMR Critical Mass Radio. You're listening to Dan Ognuscu, the Green Man, on the Cry Freedom Show, leading the way on mankind's moral, compassionate, and ethical obligations to life on this planet. Loving that. Thanks, Rev. Okay, so regular listeners will know how strongly I feel about the government's plans to slaughter thousands of this country's native animal, the badger, and will also know how many experts, scientists and people believe that the whole proposal to deal with this man-made problem of bovine TB is completely and utterly ludicrous. And I just wanted to keep this item current because our badgers could well be getting shot, killed and wounded within weeks if this decision is not overturned. So I'm just going to read out one article, because I am running out of time a bit now, that was actually published in the Express last Sunday. And the title is, Call to Leave Injured Badgers Bleeding to Death. Badly wounded badgers could be left bleeding to death in their sets whilst marksmen have to apply for licenses to put them out of their misery. A flaw in the government's badger culling policy means expert shots licensed to kill badgers do not have legal authority to dispatch the animals if they escape underground in agony. Animal welfare organisations last night condemned the ill-advised conflict between the government's badger cull policy and the Protection of Badgers Act brought in 20 years ago to protect the creatures. The RSPCA International Fund for Animal Welfare and the Badger Trust, opponents of the decision to carry out a cull as a way of combating bovine TB, spoke out after the loophole in the best practice guidance notes came to light. As marksmen prepare to begin trial culls in Gloucestershire and Somerset, opponents criticised a key point in notes drawn up by DEFRA and Natural England, the government's advisor on the environment. Section 54 warns, if an injured badger is believed to have taken refuge in a set, the set must not be dug into or interfered with in any way.
nor must dogs be entered into the set. If set interference is considered to be in the badger's best interests, Natural England must be approached for a licence, and any otherwise prohibited actions only taken after an appropriate licence to do so has been granted. Badger Trust spokesman Jack Reedy said, "We have a conflict between the brutal, ill-advised culling policy and a law designed to protect this species." Robbie Marsland, UK director of IFAW, said, "A permit would be unlikely to arrive before either the badger had died a long, agonising death or has fled to other areas, very possibly spreading TB to other animals. A stressed and injured badger carrying the TB bacteria is actually more likely to develop the disease in its most infectious form." The RSPCA said the success of the cull will partly be judged on the examination of carcasses retrieved by the marksman to see if their shooting causes unnecessary suffering. If a badger is shot cleanly, it will be easy to collect, and so the only carcasses submitted for examination may be those badgers that are shot cleanly. So the cull may be seen as a success in terms of having little impact on animal suffering, because those animals that will suffer the most will probably never be found. Mary Krieg, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, said, "The cull will cost more than it saves, put a huge strain on the police, and will spread bovine TB in the short term as badgers are disturbed." Natural England said the guidance includes specific criteria to avoid animals being left injured, including a safe shooting distance from sets. So that was the article from the Express, and yes, well, to me, words fail on that one, yet again. I just think that we've now entered very much into the age of complete and utter lunacy, and to be honest, myself personally, I still think this is all a massive distraction technique being used by the government, and I still think this is all going to be retracted on at the last minute, but that's just my opinion. And I think if anyone in any way believes that this government had the best interests of the British people and land at heart, then surely there can't be much belief left, because the world has just gone mad, and I think it's up to the sane now to call time out and actually take control. Right, I am running out of time tonight because, yet again, it's gone extremely quickly. So, as per usual, I'd just like to let you know that coming up next after me at 9 o'clock, we have the Reverend George with the Prisoner Broadcast, with guests Pippa G, and he also has an interview that I'm keen to hear with someone I believe to be one of the few decent MPs left in Parliament, and that is Paul Flynn. And I have been a fan myself of Paul for a couple of years. He highlights many of the ridiculous and crazy injustices and doings of the powers that be, and he has been quite outspoken about the badger issue too, which definitely earns him a gold star in my book. And I think he's going to be talking about how he was told to leave the chamber recently because of accusing the government of lying. So it's definitely one to listen to, I think. And I've just got to say now, George and I, the Scousers here at CMR and Scouse Night, have made a decision not to partake of any Scouse tonight, hey George, because we're actually going to treat ourselves, and I've got to say this right now, we're actually going to treat ourselves to some lemon curd sandwiches instead, aren't we, Reverend? And just forgive that is an in-joke, but I just couldn't resist. So I'm going to sign off my usual fashion. I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please keep listening to CMR and doing whatever you can to try to make a difference that counts in any way you can. And as always, I love you all. I wish you all a perfect life, perfect health, and a magic future from the heart. Take care, everybody. This track is going to be very short and will probably get cut off because I've only got a few minutes left. But good night, everyone, and take care.
You're listening to Critical Mass Radio. Now, it's our turn.